Hello and welcome to TAA Conversations on Art and Peace. Today we are honored to welcome Bill Carney, a multidisciplinary artist, strategist, educator, and cultural bridge builder. Bill's journey from his roots in Harlem to his global work in Africa, Europe, the Gulf, and the Caribbean is a testament to the power of creative expression to foster peace, understanding, and community. His work spans music performance and production, media innovation, public speaking, education, clothing design, and African art. Beyond the arts, he has advised Fortune 100 companies, private families, and led initiatives that promote dignity, unity, and cross-cultural dialogue. At the core of Bill's practice is a belief that art can transform individuals and societies, a belief that deeply aligns with the mission of the Art Association. Bill, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Sam. It's good to see you.
Always good to see you. And I'm going to jump right into that first question. How have your international experience shaped your path?
Oh, my goodness. Okay. That's a big one. But I think I can I'll try and answer that as succinctly as possible. When I was, I guess, 7 years old, my mother remarried. My mom at the time had been divorced, and she remarried a gentleman from Sierra Leone, who became my stepfather and actually later adopted me. And we left Harlem, where I am originally from, and moved to Sierra Leone when Sierra Leone got its independence from the British in 1961. That was a huge shock, as you can imagine. Leaving the United States, we actually took a ship to go first to the UK, to Southampton, and then took another ship from Southampton to go to Sierra Leone, because in those days, commercial aviation was not exactly what it is today on the African continent. My father enrolled me in an African school. And because of his position, well, let me even back up. In a public African school, which meant that many of the children who were in school with me, I think it's safe to say, were significantly less privileged than I was. I don't mean to claim by any means that I'm a person, or was at that time a person of super privileged, but when you compare yourself against people who barely have enough money to be able to buy breakfast before coming to school, it was clear that I was privileged. They ran me through the hoops. and I was very quickly forced, obliged, cajoled into trying to understand a new way of life, a new way of thinking, new dietary habits, new smells, basically new everything. And this was happening when I was only 8 years old. We stayed in Sierra Leone only for 2 years because my father got a little bit not a little bit, but a lot disenchanted with the corruption that was then prevalent in the Sierra Leonean government. And he accepted a post with the United Nations that took us to Dakar, Senegal. I lived in Senegal for 7 years, where I learned to speak French and also learned a little bit of Wolof at the time, but also learned about some of my Senegalese friends who were from different ethnic groups within Senegal. So there was a whole nother learning experience moving from an Anglophone-based country to a Francophone-based country, and to what was from Sierra Leone, which was predominantly Christian, to Senegal, which is predominantly a Muslim country. That was a whole nother, if you will, wonderful learning experience for me. So I think the short answer to the question is I got dropped in the swimming pool at a very early age, or for my French friends who know Astérix and Obélix, they dropped me into the marmite at a very early age, and I learned to swim, and I've been swimming ever since. And indeed, I think that swimming has become part of my personality over the years. Thank goodness. I remember my father saying before he passed that one of his concerns was that as we moved around, because after Senegal, we went to a number of other countries as well, one of his concerns was that I would grow up without any roots. And to some extent, he was right. On some levels, he was right. But then I also realized that we live in a world that has become increasingly rootless. And not ruthless, but rootless. And as a result of that, I think unknowingly, he prepared me for a reality that he had no idea was going to come forth. And I, even though he's no longer with me, I thank him every day for that. So yeah, Sam, it's been it started early and it's ongoing. Started early and ongoing.
And that brought you to Europe, and you've spent a great deal of time in Europe. You've spent a great deal of time in the United States. And I suspect, and what I've seen, you synthesized all of that each step of the way to make you who you are today, and a very rich cultural experience, to say the least.
Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate. I think perhaps when I was a little bit younger, I didn't really see it as being fortunate. I think I was probably a little bit of a spoiled brat and felt that I was being put upon. But the bottom line is, as the years have gone by, it's very clear that it was a blessing in disguise. And I, as you mentioned, 30 years in Switzerland as well. And boy, oh boy, was that another wake-up call in and of itself. But bottom line is, every place I lived in the UK for a while, every place I lived exposed me to a different reality. And if one is going to be comfortable where one is, one has to learn to, if not necessarily adapt or integrate, at least adjust to some extent to the reality that's around you. That requires a certain amount of flexibility. It demands that one try not to be ethnocentric, which is often not easy. But that, again, was a lesson that I learned early, and I have tried to kind of keep with me as the years have gone by. So, I reached this point, no complaints, my brother, no complaints whatsoever.
Well, Bill, I'd like to probe a little bit further, because I've had the pleasure, as thousands of people have had, to watch you in action, whether in your producing huge concerts in Africa or lecturing to diverse groups throughout the world. You have a way to connect to the extent that I've seen where, at the risk of a riot, they've tried to stop you. Simply, the organizers ran out of time, but the audience just insisted that you carry on. So I'd like to know, what is it that you feel, from your experience, is your key to connecting so deeply with such diverse audiences?
I've thought about this, Sam. This question has run through my head quite a number of times as I've tried to figure out, because it became clear, for, I guess, already when I was teaching in Switzerland, whatever, that yes, that I have somehow had acquired an ability to connect with people of different cultures, different ethnic backgrounds, or whatever. And at first I wondered whether I had developed some kind of technique, if you will, kind of perhaps subconsciously. And then, the more I think about it, I realize, Sam, it's not a technique at all. I think what I learned at a very early age was just to respect the essential humanity of everyone that I meet. And I try and project that energy. I try to make people feel that I enjoy them, that I respect them, that hopefully we can learn from each other. And I think when you don't approach people on your high horse, to use an expression, most people I found have been very open and accepting. And the reality is I think everybody we all live with our own little movie in our head. And to some extent, the movie that you have may be totally centered around yourself, or may require other players to animate, invigorate, bring some life into your life. And I learned very early on, as I mentioned, I was learning a lot from my poor Sierra Leonean friends. I was learning a lot from my Senegalese friends. I learned a lot from my Swiss friends, even though they were a little bit racist, particularly back in the 60s. All of that was a learning experience. And I've tried to some extent, and I know this is going to sound perhaps a little cliche, but to try and keep the eyes of a child, right? And not let historical baggage frame my reality and frame my perceptions of other people. Because as you know, we Black people have a somewhat troubled, difficult history. I'm not saying that other ethnic groups have not, but I'm just speaking about ours. Yeah. So again, and as I'm speaking to you now, it really is just simply a basic respect for human dignity. That person that I'm talking to is a human being like me. Yes, we have different backgrounds, different experiences, but the bottom line is, without being too graphic, is we all drink water, we all go to the bathroom, and most of us guys put our trousers on the same way. So there are, and I think, particularly in certain societies, the American one particularly, that old adage of divide and conquer and divide and rule has been used very astutely over time to push people and to categorize people into little boxes that to me are often completely artificial. It's a marketing game. And as a marketer, I recognize it for what it is. And I've tried to avoid that, right? And I think my early background, having to deal with so many different people from so many different cultures, I think has allowed me to kind of use that as a filter, right? Well, I don't care about the rest of the stuff. You and me are human beings. We're people. We can get together. We can talk. We can work things out. There's nothing impossible.
It's wonderful that such a rich international exposure has led you to the person who emphasizes the similarities rather than the differences.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
But Bill, let me take you to a slightly different angle here. The Art Association maintains that art influences inner, community, and eventually global peace. I'd like to take this and apply it to your situation.
Mm-hmm.
How does your work in music, education, public speaking, media, fashion contribute to your own personal inner peace? And then eventually,
yeah. I got you. That's a very interesting question. And, obviously you had mentioned to me that we were going to be doing this Zoom. And so over the last couple of days, to be honest, I did a little soul searching. And I also came to a realization that all of the things that I've done, all of the things that you mentioned, which may sound somewhat disparate and a little bit all over the place, there's actually a red thread that runs through all of them. And that red thread has to do with both my inner peace and also trying to make a contribution to a more peaceful world. And perhaps that needs a little bit of explanation.
Please.
When I reflected back on everything I've done, and as I listened to you earlier, you very clearly see that there's a very Black or African part of me. And as you can see from the medallion that I wear around my neck 24 hours a day, Africa is very close to my heart. And what I realized, and I'd never really thought about it like this before, Sam, quite honestly, until you triggered the thought pattern, is that I was going to do a little research before this, and I forgot to check, but a few centuries ago, the Pope basically gave Black people to the Portuguese, right? He carved up the New World and said, South America and all of that, Queen Isabella or whatever her name was, you get that. And the other New World, Africa, that, the Portuguese explored, has discovered, Portugal, you have that. So bottom line, already back, and I think it was like 1600 or something. If I forget the exact date. I think 1643 sticks in my head for some reason. But anyway, we were transformed from human beings into chattel, right? By the edict of the church. And the church in those days, as you well know, was all powerful. Okay. Let's zoom forward a few hundred years and come to the United States, where the United States becomes historically the first country to enshrine legally racial distinctions, which were, to put it mildly, unfavorable to Black people, right? The legal distinction of 3/5 of a man, right? Under the US law, I was 3/5 of a human being, right? And we were chattel. We were bought and sold like cattle, sheep, and treated accordingly as well. That battle, if you will, or because it is a battle, it's a battle against us, has been raging now for, my goodness, what, 5 centuries? We were slaves for 3 centuries. I mean, that's something I've got to throw out here. We were slaves for 300 years. Not a few months, not the time of World War I or World War II, but 3 centuries. Within those 3 centuries, obviously there was a mental mindset that was spread throughout much of the world that we were inferior. And we have been, and still are, in many cases, treated accordingly. And what I realized is that as a very young man, I was exposed to racism in a very nasty way when I was 12 years old in a boarding school in Switzerland. I don't want to go into the details of that. It's rather a painful memory. So, but the bottom line is, it's suddenly, 12 years old, somebody slams the pie in your face, right? And you're forced to realize, oh my goodness, this is real. This is not some ethereal or ideological state of being. This is very real. And what I did then, and I didn't realize what I was doing, was I embraced Black music as a young man. And Motown and all of these people, Stax Records, all these were the expression were a positive expression of our culture, and was also a way to demonstrate to the rest of the world that no, we're not cows, we're not sheep, that we have both intellectual, musical, and spiritual integrity that can be shared with the world. And I realized that almost everything that I've done, Sam, has been driven by that desire to try and end this battle that seems to exist between certain ethnic groups and Black people. It's not a global phenomenon. It tends to be particularly pernicious in certain countries. I didn't come on here to lambaste anybody. Everybody probably who will listen to this will know exactly what I'm talking about. But the African clothing, the music concerts in Africa, you notice everything that I've done, and even the teaching. And let me mention the teaching one bit, because one of my students, or one of my early students, because I started teaching on the side. It was really a side hustle rather than, because I was doing other things that were more lucrative. But I remember one of my students, an American student, coming up to me in Switzerland and saying, Professor, I've never had a Black professor before. And that was a little bit of a shock to me. I says, you're very, very good. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. And I was like, ooh, that was a kind of interesting double-sided comment. And then I guess a few months after that, I was in IMI, which is now IMD, the major business school in Switzerland. And I was a professor there. And I was at the copy machine one day, and one of the executives who was in one of the programs came down and he saw me in front of the copy machine. And he had a stack of paper, and he basically threw this stack of paper at me and said, "Here, make copies for me." And I looked at him, and I said, "Excuse me, sir?" And he said, yeah, make copies for me. I need them. I'm in Dr. Neubauer's class. And I looked at him and I said, well, with all due respect, making copies for people is not my job. I said, my name is Professor Carney. I'm one of Dr. Neubauer's peers, and it's not my habit to have people throw paper at me and order me to make them copies. May I suggest you go back to your class, throw the paper at Dr. Neubauer, and ask him to come down and make your copies if you see so fit. The gentleman was obviously terribly embarrassed because he realized that he'd just shown himself for what he really was. And that marked me. That marked me. And I became, I'm not sure what word to use, but the crusade became to demonstrate to perhaps certain less enlightened people that Black people come in all shapes, colors, and levels of intelligence, right? And that was, 20 years at the Instituto de Empresa in Madrid, with Spain in those days also not being one of the most open cultures in the world. I remember the dean once telling me, Bill, we love having you here because you make us look exotic. I couldn't believe it. And then 5 minutes later, we talked about Washington, D.C., and he says to me, I says, yeah, oh, Washington, I used to live there. My kids used to go out and play with the niggers in the playground. And yeah. And I looked at the guy. I couldn't believe he was saying this to me. And this is like late 1980, 1990 something. I mean, this guy's the dean of a major Spanish business school. He should know better than to comport himself like this. So I realized to some extent I've been on a crusade most of my life without really embarking on the crusade per se. It's not like I said, oh, I'm going to do this. It was a natural reaction to trying to give myself some inner peace, kind of to counterbalance the negativity that was kind of coming in on a regular basis from all directions.
You did it with dignity, and you did it with dignity, and you did it in an exemplary way. I would also say that when you say the name Dr. Bill in the French part of Switzerland, and albeit perhaps the entire country, they will remember distinctly the DJ on Couleur-Trois, the space that you carved, and the generations that you fed with music and magic the way you did it. In addition, I can say that there's nothing but inner peace when I've seen you behind your drum set in your studio doing what you do. So, and the idea and the way you so eloquently expressed the impact of Motown, the music, and how it really did influence a generation. It gave dignity and it opened eyes. And whatever hypocrisy might have existed, it attacked that as well. Music is music, and it brought people together. And
correct.
That is consistent with the Art Association mission to encourage peaceful engagement through art in all its forms.
Absolutely.
And I just might say, if I may be incorrect, but if I'm not mistaken, you're on the board of that school that you had that horrendous experience in, and in fact, I don't think that's going to happen while you're on duty. So
I have. That is correct. I served on the advisory board for several years, particularly during the time when DEI, as it is now known, was somewhat of an issue post George Floyd, and obviously before the current president has done everything he can to put brakes on that particular movement. There was a certain amount of, gosh, I hate to use the word, but there's a certain amount of vindication in going back up to the school and sharing with the current generation of teachers and educators and proctors, the people who look after the kids there, to make sure that none of the students of color would have to go through what I went through. Because one of the reasons I was asked to join the board was because there were a couple of very ugly incidents. The school, I think, was a little bit at a loss to how to handle it. And so they reached out to me Then they discovered that I had some similar issues because I never publicized this. It was part of my issues. And so they asked me to come up and address the faculty and whatever, which I did. And then I subsequently became an advisor on the advisory board. I dropped out last year simply because I have a lot going on and I don't like to get involved in things where I don't have the time to fully commit myself. But yes, I still keep my eye on the school, and I'm still very closely attached to them. Yes.
So, Bill, I'd like to hear. I know that you're involved in so many different things right now. Your clothing line, your music, syndicated, shouting out periodically with some really nice tracks. What projects do you have on right now, and what's in the pipeline?
At the moment, I'm having, I gotta admit, I'm having the time of my life. And it's not the first time, but this one I'm really enjoying. I have gotten, somehow I found somehow I found myself in the real estate business here in Portugal. And a friend of mine who owns several agencies reached out and said, "Hey, would you like to collaborate with us? I see you got some extra time." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And as I got into it, I recognized I was enjoying it. And yeah, it was a hustle, but it's also, if you take it properly, it's problem solving, right? I have customers who have a problem, either they want a home or they want to get rid of a property, whatever. And I help them solve the problem. You know how I work. It's not about selling somebody a house or that's not the issue at all. And that approach, what I guess back home we would call being customer focused as opposed to product focused, is relatively new here in Portugal. People are still very much selling product. And so within a very relatively short period of time, I made some interesting sales. And it seemed to be sustainable because the customers were coming. And so I said to myself, okay, well, listen, I'm enjoying this. There seems to be a little traction. I'm on the runway ready for takeoff. And so I decided to create my own real estate operation, Carney Property Group, which is now up and running, and focus initially on Portugal, but a few other areas as well. And that elicited a call from a finance group in the UK called the NS Global Group, who specialize in financing for high net worth individuals and mortgage brokering. And, we'll get you a mortgage or finance or property with your crypto holdings. So we're a little bit outside of the norm. We do things that the normal banks won't do. And they approached me, and I've hooked up with them as well. So now I have a full, if you will, almost a full operation. And just the day before yesterday, I signed a Wharton MBA who's going to be joining us, who's going to be handling the relocation side of things. So I've now set up an entire, kind of vertical where basically you come in with a problem and we put you out the other end, housed with a visa and hopefully happy, right? And it's been great fun.
Bill, I admire your entrepreneurship. You are able to mix and balance. Any one of these sectors that you're involved in would be sufficient for most people. But of course, you need to be going down in all lanes and as many as possible. Bill, let me conclude with, what message would you like to share with the Art Association's International Community of Artists for Peace?
Does this have to be apolitical?
We purposefully do not. We are non-sectarian. We are non-political. We are focusing on the artist who plays an incredibly important role that is often overlooked, and we don't want any barriers or obstacles to get in the way between the message of the artist's role and the the message of peace, inner, community, and global peace. So to that extent, I would ask that you focus with those parameters.
Okay, I quite understand, and I respect that. The reason I asked the question is, without getting political, there are just a couple of conflicts happening at the moment that are particularly close to my heart and that upset me quite a bit, particularly one that's been going on for more years than it should have. And if, to some extent, I'm sympathetic to that simply because it echoes something that we have gone through, we as Black people have gone through as well. So I guess the message to the folks who would be listening to this is relatively simple. Is keep an open mind, keep an open heart, and where you can, try and make a difference to make this a better world to the extent that you possibly can.
And well said. And to the extent that art in all its forms plays a critical role in that process, we at the Art Association advocate.
Art is often, if I jump in just for a second, art is often the only refuge that folks have to make their whatever public or known to the outside world. It has been that way since time immemorial. One could even go back to the days of the court jester and say that there was an art form there as well, if you will, right? So yeah, keep an open mind, keep an open heart, and to the extent you can, try and make this world a better place.
Bill, thank you for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, and your visions with us. Your life's work uniting art, education, entrepreneurship, and advocacy illuminates the many ways love and creativity can promote understanding and peace across borders. We are grateful for your contribution to this conversation and for your commitment to using art as a force for love, unity, dignity, and transformation. Thank you, Bill.
Peace and love, Sam.
That's a wrap.